Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 22nd of September, 2021, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish, and we're delighted to be joined by David Scott, bringing us northern exposure from north of the border.
Well, Boris is in the United States. He went and he met Kamala Harris. He seemed to meet Kamala before he met Biden. But anyway, what was he talking about? The AUKUS, of course, this new defense alliance. He was talking about the fact that the UK-US relationship remains unrivaled in its scale and steadfastness. And he said, thank you very much to Biden for the US military leadership during the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which was all very strange because I thought we hated them for that. But anyway, he then met Biden. There they are together. And I think they look much better that way, Brian.
Well, it's just the masks. They're wearing the black masks. 1 minute people are in masks, the next minute they're not in masks. But when it's a photo shoot, we have to be in the black masks.
Yeah, absolutely. So they were talking about AUKUS, of course, COP26. And then, well, he met some other people as well. So Korean Premier Moon here and who's that? Oh, Jeff Bezos. For some reason, they were meeting Jeff Bezos. What were they talking about? COP26, of course, and his Leaf Coalition and Bezos Earth Fund's commitment to give $1 billion to protect forests and remove carbon from the air. Now, I'm not entirely sure how removing carbon from the air protects forests when trees breathe carbon dioxide. But anyway, that's what they said. And he met some other people as well. But Boris put out a little bit of video. And I'm sorry, I'm just going to apologize in advance to everybody for this 37-second clip. Just have a listen to this and listen carefully, and I'll explain why you need to listen carefully in a second.
We haven't got much time left. Only about 40 days until the COP26 summit, and I'm here at the UN in New York to tell world leaders that they must be ambitious in their targets to cut CO2 emissions. The world is looking at them. The developing world is counting on them. Future generations utterly depend on them. We must get it right. History will judge us, and we can't let them down.
Right, so it was this bit at the end that sort of grabbed me because history, and it's a bit of English grammar here, David. I'm going to welcome you to the program with this because he finished off by saying history will judge us and we can't let them down. But in the previous section, he was talking about them being world leaders, but history will judge us and we can't let world leaders down. That doesn't make sense. So who is the them that he's talking about? It's all very strange. So, David, I'm interested in your thoughts on this. Sorry.
I thought he'd really upped the ante because he said, well, there's not much time left. We've only got 40 days. I mean, we've had some global warming alarmism before, but 40 days to the end of the world. I mean, that's really out there. But apparently, he didn't quite mean that. It was a badly worded speech all round. But the one thing that came across is all of this: we're going to protect the forests. We're going to essentially stop development in the third world. So if you're in a poor country, it's going to stay poor because there won't be any development. And remember, the Club of Rome concluded back in the 70s, the real enemy is humanity itself. And that's what this is all about.
Okay, and just to end this segment briefly, somebody else was there as well. If you look carefully, you might spot her. On the right-hand side there is Liz Truss. And of course, it puts a massive sense of amusement, or it is a massive sense of amusement to me that Liz Truss is actually the Foreign Secretary. Well, she had this to say because they have decided to hold a P5 meeting of foreign ministers in the Security Council. That's Britain, France, the United States, Russia, and China. The P5 have clear and shared interests in maintaining stability in volatile regions to prevent terrorism and keep our citizens safe, she said. But anyway, they're going to have this P5 meeting. Russia and China are going to laugh at them all. But what is your view on her being Foreign Secretary?
I mean, what does it matter these days who's actually holding the post? I mean, none of them have the intellect to make an impact. And it would appear that none of them have the authority either. It's maybe more interesting who's running the cabinet office, but who's foreign secretary? It's window dressing.
Can I just add to this that, of course, Boris was, I think, very unsettled because the American media had pinned him down on how many children do you have, Boris? And I think he came up with a total of 6, although there was a possibility there were a few more lurking around, I believe. But clearly, the pressure of that may have just destabilised some of these talks, Mike, I think.
It could well be. Well, look, let's come on to some more serious issues. And David, the question of the economy and potential collapse. Well, the collapse seems to get closer every day. We're seeing that with gas prices. We'll come on to that in a second, and CO2, which we'll come on to in a second. But Evergrande, this is Zero Hedge covering this, but I haven't seen too much coverage in the British press, but maybe I've just missed it. Evergrande misses debt payments due Monday as world's richest banker says China's Lehman moment has arrived. But of course, it's not really China's Lehman moment, is it? Because it's mostly Western companies that are invested in this nonsense.
Well, I'm not sure that that's quite right. But Evergrande is a huge developer property company in China. And the reason, Mike, that you haven't maybe heard too much about this from the Western media is the Western media have been reporting on it, but their only main line is, don't you worry your pretty head, it's all going to be fine. It's not another Lehman moment, honest. The losses are curtailed and contained. Zero Hedge is quoting people who are not quite so sanguine about the whole thing. So they've missed a payment of $300 million on Monday, an interest payment. No, billion is its debt pile. Billion is its total debt.
Right.
It was the interest. It was 300 million in interest it missed, which is still rather a lot of money. And of course, the banks to whom that money was owed are now themselves destabilised by the sheer volume of the unsustainable and uncertain debt. So Zero Hedge here is commenting on Wall Street analysts. They're churning out commentary saying that the troubles in Evergrande pose a threat to the Chinese economy, but it doesn't represent a Lehman moment. And they then quote here the Britain's own Financial Times at length. And it assures us that China's situation is very different. And it's very unlikely. The lesson for Lehman was that moral hazards need to take a back seat to systemic risk, they conclude. So the Times waffles on about how it's not going to be a Lehman moment, and then basically says, but when it is a Lehman moment, we've just got to bail them out, and never mind the moral hazard, never mind that we're bailing out the losers, never mind that we're taxing our population and our children to pay for the bankers or the property developers' mistakes. You just have to. You've just got to hold your nose and do it. And this is the viewpoint in the West. Whether it's the viewpoint in China, I suspect we will very shortly find out. From closer to China, here we see one of India's largest, the founder of one of India's largest lending banks, the Mahindra Bank. He says Evergrande seems like China's Lehman moment. The Indian government acted swiftly, provided calm to financial markets. Governments appointed board estimates, 61% recovery, and Evergrande bonds are trading at 25 cents to the dollar. So that's not very great. Next slide here shows, this is part of the analysis of this problem by Yahoo Finance, and they're talking about the vast amount of debt all over the world. Every country, every sector seems to be mired in debt. And to illustrate this, they've got a graph of how much debt is held by the public. So this is the public globally exposure to financial risk. And it used to be very modest. I mean, up to 1980, you think of the 80s as, the Filofax generation and very aggressive, but really it was relatively modest. And it's actually since the financial crisis that it's gone stratospheric. So we're now looking at, what's that, 21 trillion US dollars. So a very substantial amount of debt held by the public. So this may affect if we start to see a collapse, a Lehman-style collapse across financial markets, this will affect a great many people very fundamentally. The Times did report on the Evergrande situation. A nice illustration here. This is one of their developments, so you can see the scale of it. It's a vast high-rise development on an artificial island, and obviously this is just one of many. So they say that essentially this was a company not really known to very many British investors, but it claims to have built homes for 12 million people at a market cap of $4 billion. But earlier this year it was worth closer to 30 billion. So it reports Asian banks are taking a hit, and it concludes there is never only one reason why markets go into the red. This week, central bankers at the US Federal Reserve and Bank of England will meet to discuss when they should start to withdraw some of the support brought in during the pandemic, which helped fuel markets to record highs. So they're recognising that the money printing, the government money printing, has been what's lifted the market up. And the question is, will the government, will the Bank of England ever take this away? Will they ever remove the crack pipe? Because the high can just be continued, it seems, by endless money printing. Or will at some point, will there become a reckoning? Now, those who follow Austrian economics says, yes, there will be a reckoning, there will be a hangover, there will be a crash. On the far side of this boom, there will be a bust. The governments, the central banks across the world are ever more coordinated in making sure that will not happen. So we have a battle between these financial institutions and the governments that back them and economic reality. I know which side my money's on.
Indeed, but even if they do manage to keep things going, David, to some degree, that doesn't mean that there isn't going to be an impact on the general public or everybody to some degree, because of course, even if they manage to keep things going, there's always some kind of contagion which affects other people's lives. And well, here's Kwasi Kwarteng, the business secretary, talking about the situation with gas prices. And he's saying the recent increase in wholesale global gas prices continue to be a cause of concern for consumers, businesses and energy suppliers across the country. I think it's going to be more than a cause of concern as the price rises hit on the 1st of October and then more price rises in April. But the government now has taken emergency action to protect CO2 producers, or at least one of them, as we'll see in a second. But he went on to say, we want to be clear that this is not an issue of supply. The United Kingdom benefits from having a diverse range of gas supply sources with capacity that can more than meet demand. He didn't say what it was, though. He said it's not an issue with supply, but he didn't explain what it was. In the event an energy supplier fails, we're committed that customers face the least amount of disruption possible. Central to any steps is our clear and agreed position that the energy price cap will remain in place. Well, the energy price cap is remaining in place, but it has been raised, which is why the gas companies and electricity companies are raising the prices of those commodities for consumers in October, and it's why they're going to raise them again in April, because it's likely to be the energy price cap is likely to be raised again in April. But the question is, how does this affect CO2? Well, the gas prices, gas is used to produce CO2 for food production and other purposes. And we reported, I think it was back in May or so. Was this May? I think it was chicken prices under pressure from July. All right. Okay. Chicken prices under pressure from carbon dioxide crisis. There's another one in the Telegraph. Barbecue squeeze as CO2 shortages hit meat supplies. CO2 shortage could happen again, said food manufacturer. Well, it didn't. It never actually disappeared. There was never a relaxation to the problem in the last couple of months. The gas world saying UK CO2 shortage shows signs of easing within weeks. No, didn't happen. That was in August. And poultry sector warns of new CO2 prices with supplies on a knife edge. Well, it turns out that 60% of the UK's CO2 production comes from one company, and it's this one, CF. And they're all about growing together as CF focuses on our people, our purpose, and our infrastructure towards creating a cleaner future. We are refreshing our brand values and objectives. You'll notice that some visual changes to the brand, but your favorite products are staying the same. So that's excellent news. But they produce 60% of our CO2 in the UK, except when they don't, because they announced on the 15th of September that CF Industries Holdings Inc., a US company, announced the halt of operations at UK facilities. So CO2 production stopped. And as a result, the government has effectively stepped in to bail this company out. Now, they said that they were not going to step in to bail out smaller energy retail companies that are being stuffed by the price of wholesale energy at the moment, but they are going to bail out this big US organization. And so let's bring Kwasi back on screen again. This agreement will ensure that the many critical industries that rely on a stable supply of CO2 have the resource they require to avoid disruption. So they're calling this a short-term intervention. And basically, they're saying that the agreement will ensure the many critical industries that rely on CO2 have resources they require. The quick and decisive action we've taken to resolve the issue shows the seriousness with which they've approached it. And so they're going to provide this company basically the running capital, David, that they need to get through the next several weeks. Well, it can't be described as anything other than a bailout.
Yes, and it's odd. I mean, leaving aside the deeply funny situation that we've got a shortage of CO2, right? That just tickles me very deeply. And the fact that we're talking about price caps on gas prices. Price caps don't work. Price ceilings don't work. If the market value ends up above the price ceiling you've set and you maintain the price ceiling, what you get is shortages. And in energy terms, that means blackouts. So watch for that one. And in terms of this company not being able to make ends meet, CO2 prices have gone up 500%. How can they not be making money? How can they not be surviving on that? It seems very strange. I wonder if there's more to that story.
Can I just ask the question then? Is this perhaps deliberate policy to suppress the CO2 in order to suppress the eating of meat and help usher in the green agenda, Mike?
I think that is very much what's on the cards there, Brian, and certainly that's one of the things they're discussing in New York at the moment in preparation for COP26. But Rishi is very excited at the moment because green finance is vital in helping us tackle the environmental challenges we face. And the launch of our first green bond is a signal that the UK continues to be a world leader in this area. So, David, you will be mighty impressed to know that the UK government issued its first green bonds yesterday, and they got £10 billion worth of finance to pump into Green New Deal projects. And they're going to do a second issuance of green bonds later in the year, where they're expecting another 5 or 10 billion. So they're very excited about it.
This is very great. It's very good. I'm very interested to see how they manage to know what to invest in, since price signals are no longer working because we're investing in things because of political imperatives and fake science, not because they stack up economically. That seems to me to be a way of losing a great deal of money, but maybe I'm just old-fashioned.
Nostalgic, I think, is the word that some would use, but you need to have watched previous UK column news perhaps to understand what we mean by that. But anyway, let's move on. If you like what the UK column does and you'd like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community, and there are options to help us out there. Please do share our material you find on the various platforms, including Twitter, Facebook. Still, somehow, don't know quite how we're still there, but anyway, we are for the meantime. Brand YouTube, Rumble, BitChute, and Odyssey. Although I should say, somebody in the chat box said that the Facebook stream isn't working today, so maybe I'm already out of date on that one. Just a quick reminder that we have put up our vouchers for Christmas presents, if anybody wants to grab one of those to give as a gift at Christmas. And we'll have more to talk about on this issue in the not too distant future.
Indeed. Well, if we've got madness in the economic system, let's jump into the subject of health. And the BBC getting its underwear slightly tangled, I think, in this one, because they don't really know where to go. But look at the headline: "Over-prescribing of medicines must stop," says the government. So this is in a country being rammed full of vaccines, which is clearly medication, but over-prescribing of medicines must stop. Many patients are being prescribed unnecessary and even harmful treatments. Can you imagine such a thing happening in the UK, Mike?
But this must be fake news, because you don't need a prescription for a vaccine, but you do need a prescription for the types of drugs that you get from your GP, and nobody can get to see their GP. So how can this be?
Well, we're going to explore this whole scenario. So here we are. The review in England suggests a tenth of items dispensed by primary care inappropriate, should be changed. 15% of people take 5 or more medicines a day. Some are to deal with the side effects of others. Surely there can't be side effects from medication.
Couldn't be.
The government is appointing a prescribing tsar to help with the issue and stop waste. So that is clearly going to solve the whole problem. Now, this gentleman's quoted in the article, Professor Martin Marshall. He's chair of the Royal College of GPs. He says that GPs will only ever prescribe medication to patients in conversation with them, and after a frank discussion about the risks and benefits of the treatment, and when alternative options have been explored. Have you met anybody in the last few years, Mike, who has that story to tell about their GPs?
No.
Anybody at all who's been told the risks? Well, what risks have we always been particularly interested in? Of course, it's the risks of vaccination. So we just put these words in Professor Martin Marshall's mouth, except he's for vaccinations where we almost never talk about the real risks of vaccine adverse reactions. And of course, we get paid for the jabs. So now we're getting a clue for why there is absolute mayhem in the GP surgeries, because we can see some of it at the top. So this is the gentleman, chair of the Royal Corps of
General practitioners.
Thank you. Yes, East London GP, UCL academic, passionate about general practice and doing outdoor things. Well, a bit of a shame we're locked down then. So we've got this. You need to be pretty thick-skinned to be a GP, but these almost daily attacks on our professionalism, commitment, and integrity are demoralizing and wear you down. So there's puzzlement here as to why people should actually be getting at their GPs at the moment, but it's difficult to get at a GP because you literally can't get to them in order to discuss anything. But he did post up this video of him having a discussion with Jeremy Hunt on the subject of why people are finding it hard to get face-to-face GP appointments. So let's listen into this little clip.
Basic charges, as you know, people say, I want to see my GP face-to-face and I'm not allowed to.
Yeah. So we know the figures. About 80% of general practice was conducted face-to-face prior to the pandemic. At the height of the first wave, that was down to 10%. Now it's around about 56% of consultations are face-to-face. What we've learned from the pandemic is we can do more in general practice remotely than we thought we could. And that's a positive bit of learning. There's a lot of stuff that can be done without having to examine someone or be in the same room. Having said that, face-to-face contact is a really important part of dealing with particularly more complex problems. So there's 3 categories of patients, if I may finish. There's people who like and get real benefit from remote care. There's patients who absolutely need to have face-to-face contact in order to get high quality care, to pick up the right diagnosis, not just examining, but picking up soft signs. And then there's a large group of people in the middle who would like to have face-to-face care, but general practice currently doesn't have the capacity to deliver it. And that's the bit which is the real problem for patients and for general practice.
Just so people understand, do you have a right as an NHS patient to say, I want to sit in front of my GP?
Well, people are saying that patients should have a right. There's no point in having a right if it's undeliverable, and it is essentially undeliverable at the moment because of the workload pressures. So GPs try to meet the preferences of patients, but if there's and ideally what you want is a shared decision making between a GP and a patient to decide at triage whether face-to-face is necessary or not.
Just explain that the bit I think is difficult is 2 years ago, we understand general practice under a lot of pressure, but it was under pressure 2 years ago and before the pandemic, but people could actually get in front of their GP when they wanted to, usually relatively quickly. What has changed now that means that the profession can't offer that service to some people who want it?
Two things have changed. First of all, the workload has gone up increasingly in that period of time and indeed over the last decade. And the second thing, and I think really importantly, the pandemic isn't over. We'd like to think it is. It isn't over. It might be over for pubs and nightclubs. It's not over for health services. It's really important that if you run a health service, whether it be in general practice or in hospitals, that you protect vulnerable patients. And the prevalence still around about 1 in 70, 1 in 80 patients in this country have got COVID. So the idea of having somebody who is fit and healthy but shedding the virus sitting next to someone who's vulnerable in a waiting room is just not something that's acceptable.
Well, I'm going to suggest we could have a whole 2-hour discussion on what that man actually said. But the first thing he said, of course, was that actually, never mind the fact that people have been dying because they haven't got in to see their GPs and ultimately go through an NHS procedure for the treatment they need. GPs have apparently learnt, they've started to realise they can do more remotely. But where is the evidence that anything positive has been achieved from remote working? But what this is about in the background is a change of the whole NHS policy. We'll talk about that in a minute. But there we are. He said the AI is coming in. He doesn't mention the fact that GP surgeries are just not operating. They're not taking people through the door. But this is apparently all the fault of COVID still.
Still, yes. I mean, just as a passing comment, this is today's Metro. 673 calls to speak to my GP surgery. Well, that was somebody who couldn't get through and just was hitting the redial button over and over again. Took them about 45 minutes or something to get through. And then we're told, well, we don't have any appointments, so you better call back tomorrow. And this article really making the point that this is happening to multiple people, hundreds of calls to try to get through to a GP surgery. In England, at least, I'm told that in Northern Ireland, it's not quite as bad as that. So we're seeing different scenarios in different parts of the UK and perhaps within different parts of each of the 4 nations, as they're called these days.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, people are dying as a result of this.
Yes, and this man doesn't seem to understand the reality of what's going on. So who's driving policy? Well, if we come back to Mr. Marshall, the Royal College of GPs, he tweeted this one out, talking about members of the Inequalities in Healthcare Alliance, a coalition led by the Royal College physicians. And I thought it'd be interesting to have a look and see who the people are that are apparently the ones lobbying government to make policy, because clearly the public are of no interest to the government's healthcare policies at all. So this is Inequalities in Healthcare, which you can find if you go to the Royal College of Physicians website. And if you go to the right line, you can actually call up who's involved. Should come, here we are. So in the center of this, you can see, view the list of members of the Inequalities in Healthcare Alliance. That's it there. I encourage people to go and look at it from themselves. The only way I could do this is by a short video. So let's just press the button. Who are these people and how did they get in this position of power that while the public cannot get their message across the government, these people can? Let's just watch it scroll through. And if you can't read it, I'm going to encourage you to go to that website to see it for yourself. But these are the people deciding on health policy in UK. But if you're the people, you're the user, you're the people paying for this out of your taxes, the government is simply not interested in talking to you. So I think this is quite extraordinary. We're just about at the end of the list now. Young Lives Consortium, Voluntary Health Scotland's in there, David. So you'll be pleased to know the voice of the Scottish people is being covered within this tremendous coalition.
Well, that's not always being covered in Scotland within this, because the army is now covering Scotland. Coming to Scotland soon is more military, because the UK government has approved the support through the Military Assistance to the Civil Authority process. Following the request from the Scotland office, working with the Scottish Government, the Ministry of Defence, will provide 114 people to augment ambulance drivers and a further 111 personnel who will operate mobile testing units, which the military previously supported in 2020. So what was Ben Wallace saying about that? He had a lot of really interesting things to say. Our armed forces are once again stepping up, demonstrating their versatility as we support the COVID-19 response across the UK. And I'm just going to say, before I ask for comment from David on this, this normalization of the military being involved with civilian authorities. I mean, okay, the military have been involved in replacing fire services in the event of a national strike, for example, in the past, but this is becoming routine now. And I just want to highlight this from the integrated operating concept, which is part of the Integrated Defence Review that was released at the end of last year, where they said that the old distinction between foreign and domestic defence is increasingly irrelevant. When fake news appears to originate not abroad but at home, it gains credibility and reach, stoking confusion, disagreement, division and doubt in our societies. And went on to talk about how coming home doesn't necessarily feel safe for the military anymore. And so, David, to my mind, the normalization of military on the streets in support of, in support of what, actually, because there isn't an emergency there to support, then this becomes risky if the military believes that they're amongst enemies.
Well, and do you remember the video that we looked at of a Black Watch homecoming in Perth, or maybe 2 years ago? And rather than the normal parade, they were doing a simulated combat patrol through the town. It was very creepy. It was very strange. The reaction of the people watching was clearly unsettled. And this was not what we expected at all for a regiment coming home to its hometown. Yes, there seems to be a lot of this promotion of the military being encouraged to view the British Isles as every bit as much a combat zone as anywhere else in the world, and also view every aspect of life as part of this long and low-level war, and not simply actual combat.
Yes. Brian?
Well, you can't say any more. I think it's absolutely getting the troops on the streets to make people used to the idea you're going to see more police, more paramilitary police, and more troops.
And staying in Scotland, David, then we have to think twice before we phone 999, because I mean the last thing we would want if we were needing emergency care is for an ambulance to turn up.
Well, that's not a problem in Scotland, Mike. This is the background to the army being called out. So it started off with this report by Humza Yousaf calling on people to think twice, calling on people to only go to A&E if it was critical. Critical means that you could die. So anything where you, not being medically qualified, judge that you should live, don't go to A&E. And then it was don't phone the ambulance service because it can't take the strain. That lasted about a day until the Herald reported a father of 3 died in Glasgow after waiting 40 hours for an ambulance to turn up. And Mr. Gerard Brown, 65, his family said that they'd been told that the delay cost the former engineer his life. Mr. Brown's GP, who repeatedly warned 999 call handlers that the status was critical, branded the current crisis engulfing the ambulance service as third world medicine. So that's where we've got to there. So when that hit, there was enough of a stooshy, is the correct word, in the Scottish Parliament that Nicola Sturgeon stomped off to our office, promising to do something about it and call the army in right away. So the BBC is reporting it here, military to be called in to help Scottish ambulance crews. And Nicola Sturgeon told the Parliament, quote, "I'll be going back to my office to finalise the detail of the request for military assistance so we can submit that as quickly as possible." So this was very much in response not to a growing crisis, but to very bad press. So this is a government operating in the moment, very short term. It's all about what makes Nicola Sturgeon look good or look bad at First Minister's questions. That seems to be driving policy, not anything else. Now, the Telegraph here reports more than 200 army personnel to be deployed to tackle Scottish ambulance crisis, and quotes Mr. Wallace again, but he said, quite interestingly, a further 111 military personnel will operate the mobile testing units, that's COVID testing units, freeing up ambulance staff who currently perform this role. So we were taking a crisis hit ambulance service, we were taking hundreds of frontline trained personnel away from driving the ambulances to pick up people who were critically ill and leaving people for 40 hours to die in order to operate COVID testing centres. That, I think, is a very interesting data point and shows exactly the quality of planning that's underpinning our managerial state. More on that later. And the Scotsman then reported a little while ago, a few days ago, that Humza Yousaf was accused of not trusting his own rules after self-isolating over a positive COVID case. Now, what happened here is that there was someone near government tested positive. Nicola Sturgeon got a notice that she had to self-isolate. So she self-isolated for about a day until she got a PCR test that said she was fine, so she came back to work. Humza never got notified because he wasn't close enough to this person, but he thought that he would self-isolate anyway. So he went home and he didn't attend meetings, just to be on the safe side, you understand. So what do you do when you go home and you're not at work and you're having a day off work? There's not much to do around the house. If you're Humza, you go down to the local sports hall and play badminton with your mates, and that's what he did. It did not go well. The next slide will show you just how badly it went. And so here we see a tweet from Humza, frustrated not to be in Parliament today. Not the day before. He was quite happy the day before not to be in Parliament, but today he's frustrated because he was playing badminton and he damaged his Achilles tendon. And there you see he's got crutches and he's in a plaster and he's smiling. You know, he's a brave lad. So what do you do if you've got to get around Parliament, gentlemen? Because it's a big building. And you have crutches. These are too slow. For someone so important, whose time is so vital as Humza, you need something more rapid. And Humza found one. It's a new device to me. It's a knee scooter. Now, I've never seen or heard or knew of knee scooters before this incident, but here we have a knee scooter, and Humza got one of these. And there are some safety tips. Do not scoot at high speeds. Slow down before making a turn. If moving downhill, be extra cautious. And always keep your body balanced. These seem perfectly reasonable suggestions or precautions. The next video is deeply memorable. Still funny. I've watched that a few times. It's still funny. So Humza's knee scooter exploits. And did you see the minion behind him with the mask on, carrying his crutches for him, running along behind to keep up? It said everything that's wrong about our government in one little image. Incompetence and arrogance in one unique form. It was quite spectacular. So the response to this unfortunate accident has been a good degree of sniggering, to be honest. Here's Lawrence Fox making a comment. He says the ambulance will be with you within 40 hours, Humza. That was fair enough. But Humza wasn't happy. There was lots of media comments about his fall, and Humza wasn't happy. He tweeted out, "All for media scrutiny, and never shy away from it. Just not sure there's a need or purpose to tweet out a video of me falling over while injured. If anyone else had fallen over whilst on crutches, an e-scooter, or in a wheelchair, would your first instinct be to film it and tweet it out? Okay, so here we see Hamza's feeling sorry for himself. It's a conspiracy against me. The press just don't like me. And it was a gentleman on Scottish Twitter that pointed out that Hamza has some previous on this. Here he's celebrating the moment when Douglas Ross, MP and now leader of the Scottish Conservatives, and a Football Association referee, fell over whilst refereeing a football match, and Hamza was impatient to see the meme that would be generated from that. So it seems that some people falling over, as long as they're Tories, that's okay. But not Hamza. You're not allowed to laugh at your great leaders anymore, Brian. I know it's a British tradition to laugh at their leaders, but apparently it's banned now. You can't laugh. It's hurtful.
David, I'm still trying to get my head around the whole story. The fact that, we shouldn't put pressure on the NHS, but he goes off irresponsibly playing badminton. He chases that little shuttlecock around. He damages his leg. He can't go to Parliament to deal with the job. But then he takes up the NHS time. I think there's a lot of questions to be asked here, but what we're really looking at is utter breakdown in our governing system. And I know you want to have a talk about that separately for viewers at some stage, but we're laughing at the whole scenario here, but we're actually dealing with utter breakdown of governance in Scotland, and we've got a similar model in UK. Let's stick on the NHS, and this one was flagged up to me a couple of days ago, but it's Sir Simon Stevens speaking when he was still Chief Executive of NHS England. So this is back in January 2019, and he's talking about the NHS long-term plan, which of course is something that very few of the UK public know anything about, what it contains and what's in store once this plan unfolds. So let's have a listen to what he said.
Thank you very much, David, and Prime Minister, Secretary of State, my colleagues from across the NHS. One or two of you may have noticed that this past year the NHS has been celebrating its 70th anniversary. But today is not about the 70th, it's about the 80th. How do we keep everything that's so great about our National Health Service? High quality care for everyone, at a service that the whole country unites behind. But how do we also relieve some of the immense pressure on our frontline staff, going the extra mile day in, day out for 1 million patients a day? And at the same time, how do we capitalise on the amazing medical advances that we know are in prospect? Even just last month, we reached the 100,000th genome sequenced on the NHS. The first child in Europe got NHS-funded breakthrough cancer care CAR-T therapy. So that's the challenge facing our health service. It's the challenge, frankly, facing most industrialised countries' health services. How do you future-proof for the decade ahead? And that's what today's long-term plan is all about. We're able to do it for three big reasons. First, because thanks to the leadership of the Prime Minister, we have secure funding for the National Health Service over the next 5 years. And second, because there's a big consensus across the country and across the health service about how the health service itself needs to change. Since July, we've been working with patients groups, with frontline staff, with senior doctors, nurses, other medical professionals to answer the question what these changes should look like. And I particularly want to thank the patients groups representing 3.5 million people who've worked with us on this, including Age UK, the British Heart Foundation, the Stroke Association, Macmillan, Mind, Rethink, many others. So we've got funding certainty, we've got consensus about what needs to change, and the third big reason is because actually many of the changes that this plan sets out are already happening somewhere in the NHS, and now they need to happen everywhere across the NHS. So together we think this is a plan that is realistic and practical and costed and detailed and phased and, yes, ambitious. Some of the improvements that patients will see will happen quite quickly. New genetic tests for children with cancer this year. new options to see your GP online, radical reforms to avoid 30 million outpatient visits, guaranteed support for older people at home in the community. Some of these changes are going to take a bit longer, halving maternity-related deaths by 2025, and some are going to require staged action over the next 10 years. As extra staff come online, we seriously begin to tackle health inequalities in some of our most deprived communities, and, for example, we're able to increase the proportion of people getting an early cancer diagnosis where their survival prospects are greatest from a half now to 3/4 in a decade's time. We estimate that the combined effects of these changes could save up to 500,000 lives as we see further gains in the big killers and disablers of the people of England: heart attacks and strokes, cancer, lung problems, many other conditions. But it's also about addressing unmet need, particularly in services such as learning disability services and autism, mental health services, services that for too long have been squeezed from the national debate and unsupported by the NHS. And all of this, of course, is only going to be possible thanks to the brilliant NHS staff. The fact is we are the largest employer of skilled professionals in the world. We've got 1.3 million people who are day in, day out looking after friends, families, neighbours.
So there you have it. To be fair to him, of course, he was talking before COVID hit. But we get a snapshot of this long-term plan with a whole load of subtleties in it. So, for example, he says that this is a plan that's been discussed and agreed with coalitions of charities, Mike. You'd see him stressing the fact that they've discussed with charities and bodies that represent some 3.5 million patients, I think is what he said. So it's not the general public that's been consulted on these changes. It's these bodies, just as we're seeing with the GPs. This is participatory democracy where rights are taken away from individuals and given to charities and NGOs and other similar bodies. So that's what's happening there. And then what did he talk about? Did he talk about getting people through operations, getting people through wards, taking them out of their problems, getting full treatment for them, making healthy again? No, the priority that he mentioned was into genomic sequencing, and that got a mention twice, including with children in relation to cancer, and we'll have a look at why he's talking about that in a minute. But he's also saying that this plan is already happening. So this is not something that's being announced following agreement. It's already there working in sectors of the NHS. And this is simply announcing it and making the thing visible. What is actually being done is the NHS is being collapsed. It's being changed into a new model. So let's follow through. Who's his successor? It's this lady, Amanda Pritchard. Now, she hit the headlines very big as the first female head of NHS England. Her style is black. Almost every picture of her is she's wearing black for whatever reason. But this is where she's got to pretty quickly. Don't risk your life for fear of overburdening the NHS. That's a bit similar to Humza, isn't it, really?
Indeed.
Don't overburden us by coming to us if you're sick, because we don't want to know. She says thousands are at risk by delaying cancer checkups. As a survey finds, 60% worry about imposing on the system. Well, all the people I'm meeting at the moment aren't worried about imposing on the system. They're worried whether the system is going to treat them, which is something completely different. But if we go to her Twitter page, she's suddenly become very big on this. The NHS has today, this is talking about the 13th of September, begun the world's largest trial of a new blood test that detects more than 50 types of cancer before symptoms appear. By finding cancer early, we have the best chance of treating it and giving people the best possible chance of survival. So let's have a look at the little embedded film clip, which is her speaking on this subject.
That's Pritchard, sorry.
That's Pritchard.
Yes,
Yep.
right.
So from today, we'll be inviting people to come for blood tests in convenient locations like retail parks. And I would just say to anyone who receives a letter or receives an invitation, please do take it up and become part of this world first trial.
So we can't get into a hospital to actually be treated. We can't have normal tests in hospitals, but we now can go to a retail park in order to get these new blood tests. What's going on? Well, have a look at this tweet from her. She says the NHS has a successful track record of leading the way on innovations in cancer diagnosis and treatment, and this quick and simple blood test could mark the beginning of a revolution in cancer detection and treatment here and in the world, so around the world. So this is all to do with UK leading medical technology. How did the public reply to this? Well, it was fascinating to see what they said. The first one was this: people coming to the trial of Elizabeth Holmes. This is the Theranos trial. So this is a biotech company that was looking at this sort of test, which the lady made billions, but now has suddenly become an enemy of the state and is facing a trial over hype about what she said she could do. So that was the first reply to Amanda. And then we had this: you'll find cancer earlier if reception staff's objective weren't to prevent patients seeing GPs, and GPs didn't dismiss patients reporting cancer symptoms and saying stuff like probably an ulcer or a sore throat. So very down to earth response. And this sort of went on. This gentleman, if we take it at face value, Dr. Asif Quazim, said early detection of cancer does not equate to saving lives. Not much good when your surgery phones you to delay your blood tests for 6 weeks because of the shortage of sample bottles. And on it goes, more on the shortage of glass tubes. So people absolutely picking up on the reality. The NHS is about to start a large-scale trial of COVID vaccines for children that have no long-term safety data and very questionable short-term safety data. So this is starting to mix it with vaccines and the pharmaceuticals that we spoke about earlier. What is target chemical, the blood test? Where is the evidence base? What happens to people with positive results? How specific is it? Sounds like a gimmick. So the public very, very astute in picking up what the new chief executive is talking about. But here we are. This is the Mirror, NHS trialling what is now the holy grail of blood tests that can apparently spot 50 cancers before the symptoms appear. But once it's produced a result, what happens? Because there is no treatment in the NHS at the moment. And of course, we got wind of this some time ago. This is back February 2019. Could we soon be able to detect cancer in 10 minutes? This is part of the article. About 7 years ago, researchers at the US DNA sequencing company Illumina started to notice something odd. They were looking at expectant mothers, and then they realized that in some cases, they were seeing signs of cancer in those mothers-to-be. But as we go into this article, we get into it. In 2016, Illumina created Silicon Valley-based spin-off company Grail, with Aravanis as chief scientific officer, backed by more than 1.5 billion in funding, including money from Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates and Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, the very man sat with Boris at the start of the news.
Yeah.
So what we've actually got here is a test which is going to point us where. Well, let's come on to it, because if we have a look at Grail, in pursuit of innovation to solve healthcare's most important challenges, all very glossy. They're full of engineers, apparently, but it says they're working with the NHS in the Galleri study, investigating the clinical and economic performance of the Galleri test in the UK's NHS. The study will initially enroll 140,000 people aged 50 to 77 in the United Kingdom. Now, these are people who haven't got any signs of cancer, haven't got a history of cancer. They're going to be trialed to tell them that they've got cancer, and presumably then to say, now you've got cancer, we can't do anything because the NHS is shut down. This is one of the big men in Grail, so it's Harpal Kumar. He's the president of Grail Europe. But interestingly enough, he spent 15 years with Cancer Research UK, and that's one of the organisations that we've already seen is working behind the scenes in these sort of coalitions in order to form government policy. So, David, there's a revolving door going on here, just giving you 20 seconds. We don't know who is running the NHS at the moment. Is it the government, or is it a behind the scenes control network with Bezos, Amazon, isn't it? I think.
Yes.
Who's actually running the NHS? A lot of questions to be asked, I think.
Well, absolutely, and to what sense, what set of priorities? Because it's not the set of priorities of the patients, of the customers of the NHS. They don't really have a view. It's centrally planned. It's centrally managed. The people are not listened to on a number of levels. They're not listened to on a policy level, and often they're not listened to inside the doctor's surgery, as those tweets were highlighting. And that fundamental problem with the NHS, no one's addressing.
Nobody is addressing at all. Well, the interaction between the NHS and big profit-making pharma is very deep. This is a quote from Sir Harpal Kumar here, President Grail Europe. He said, "We're delighted to partner with the NHS to support the NHS long-term plan for earlier cancer diagnosis." And he mentions the Galleri test and how wonderful it is. But of course, at the moment, the NHS is not able to provide anything to deal with this. But the solution is around the corner, because what we now see is proposals that they're going to deal with cancer by vaccination. So here we've got the first patient dosed with BioNTech phase 2 trial of the mRNA cancer vaccine. So it seems that behind the scenes, the NHS database, as it were, just being used to absolutely drive more profit for the vaccine industry. But at the same time, we've got the government saying, well, the UK population are over-medicated, and the side effects of much of that medication is very dangerous, except where it's a vaccine, when the government refuses to talk about vaccine adverse effects.
So one other area that the NHS is very keen to get involved in, instead of actually treating patients, of course, is advertising and PR, because that's what drives people's opinions of the NHS. So here is Talent Talks. This is the UK's leading casting agency. And well, they have advertised a job coming up, which is an NHS film shoot. People aged 18 to 80 for general roles. This is taking place on Saturday, the 25th of September. It is paid. So they are shooting for the NHS between Thursday the 23rd and Saturday the 25th of September, and have a variety of requirements. So if you're wanting to take part in an NHS PR exercise, then that's the place to go for that. But that's much more important than getting appointments to GPs.
Image, spin, PR hype, but not treating people who are sick, Mike, is the priority.
Now, last week we mentioned this petition, Outlaw Discrimination Against Those Who Do Not Get a COVID-19 Vaccination, and that petition was closed. This is one of two petitions. This particular one got 347,514 signatures out of the 100,000 required in order to get a parliamentary debate. So as I say, there was this and one other petition which were being debated on the 20th, which is Monday afternoon. So Parliament debating this on the 20th. So let's have a look. David, I'm sure that you'll have seen this image for the first time. You'll be highly impressed with the number of members of Parliament who turned up to debate this petition. There you can see it. How many are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 of them. And the Minister of State was there to answer questions as well. It wasn't so much a debate as more a statement, a series of statements explaining how each of these MPs thought that the government's vaccine rollout programme was absolutely fantastic, that they thought that the disinformation and misinformation that was out on the internet about vaccines was a disgrace. Really, they were very much urging people that if they had any doubts about vaccine, any hesitancy at all about vaccines, that they should speak to their GPs about it. Well, that's a bit unfortunate because people can't speak to their GPs at the moment. So there seems to be a complete lack of any awareness or any reality amongst this lot. But out of 650 MPs, six of them seem to have turned up for this debate. And as I say, it wasn't a debate because there was no counter argument here. These were all, this was, you couldn't use a word other than echo chamber here, David, to describe what was going on there. These people are a disgrace.
That's absolutely appalling. Right, 300,000 people asked for a debate. There's a million people marching through London, and our Parliament, the mother of parliaments, just ignores it. Has no interest. A few token gestures to turn up and support the official state line, and that is all. Is that all it's for?
It is. Any thoughts?
Well, I was going to say, I just thought it disgraceful that 30% of those people in that room appeared to me breaching the COVID rules because there were two inside 6 feet of each other. I don't know whether you noticed that. So the hypocrisy is at many levels.
Indeed. Well, here's some more hypocrisy because here's the Daily Mail, and this was covered in other newspapers as well. Priti Patel saying, "I'll lock up the eco mob after yet more M25 madness. Home Secretary tells Mail she'll crack down." So this is a protest group who have been stopping traffic on the M25, which is the main ring road around London. It's extremely busy pretty much all of the time. And somehow eco-terrorists, if we could, or whatever they are, managed to get the traffic stopped, and they kept it stopped for quite some time in order to advertise their particular issue. Well, unfortunately, though, the Telegraph and I think the Mail as well covered this a few days ago. This was on the 16th of September. Made the point that protesters had been allowed to walk in front of cars and block the M25 by police. The police seemed to be facilitating it. The Telegraph had an article, "Watch Police Facilitate, Insulate Britain's M25 Protest." So Priti Patel is saying one thing while the police are doing another thing. So could this be staged? Is this in fact government supported, even though Priti Patel says one thing in the press? Well, if you want to know more about how this type of operation works, then once again, I'm just going to recommend that you get hold of the book by Joseph Boyd, The Road to Kill the Bill, because what I believe is going on here is because the Police Crime Courts Bill is continuing its way through Parliament, and this particular bill contains sections which are designed to prevent protest in the future, then protest which might create public angst or might cause people to think that they would be against that protest. These types of protests are being encouraged by the state, in my opinion. And it looks very much like the police in this case were facilitating this kind of protest. But David, this is about the legislation, I believe, and it's about time that people recognized how these types of operations work.
Yes, it's the old Hegelian dialectic. It's problem, reaction, solution. Oh, look, they've blocked the M25 again. Reaction is public anger. The solution is, well, we've got this bill going through just as well, just in the nick of time. Aren't we good? Go us. That seems to be the game that's being played.
Yes.
That's the game. We should remember, of course, that MPs can't actually think for themselves anymore. They invariably can only talk on a particular subject if they've had the briefing document from the House of Commons Library. Thank you to the viewer who said, "Have we seen this?" Because I hadn't. So it's the briefing paper on the UK vaccination policy. It's back from the 21st of January 2021. Encourage people to look at it online. There's a quite comprehensive content. But of course, one of the things that this does not contain is any in-depth analysis on risks of vaccines or adverse effects. So the dangers of vaccinations simply not discussed, but there is a very good history lesson on vaccines, probably good for a 7 or 8 or maybe 9-year-old. But this, of course, is the briefing sheet for the government. They do boast in a little, what do we call it, film clip, a cartoon is the word I'm looking for. The details about how they operate as a library. It's very short. Let's have a look at it.
I just want clear, factual information on what's happening in the world.
You can get the latest analysis of the most important topics coming from a resource that is entirely impartial, expertly researched, and totally free. Why is it free? It belongs to you. It's the online research of the House of Commons Library. Now forget any library that you have ever seen. The Commons Library is actually made up of small teams of experts critically separate from the world of politics. Their job is to gather information from trusted sources and collate it into unprejudiced research and analysis. This research is then published for members of Parliament to help them do their jobs. And because of this, that information has to be top grade, and it's there for you to read as well. Our experts specialise in a massive range of topics and come from lots of different backgrounds, such as engineering, housing, medicine, climate science and transport. As well as these specialists, the library also has statisticians, economists, lawyers, scientists and doctors, and they write reports on a multitude of subject areas close to all our hearts. Because they do all this work for all MPs of all parties, library reports are always politically impartial. They have to be. Which means you can use them to get an in-depth understanding of subjects you're interested in, and you can be confident that they've been rigorously fact-checked.
So that's the little cartoon. Remember, that was for adults. You might have thought it was for children, but actually, of course, it was for us. It was for the wider public. And what did they stress? That this resource was for us. It was for MPs, but actually it was for us, the public. After all, we pay for it. But if we have a look at the report that they produced on vaccines, and of course, this is the same for all their report, they say something different. So let's have a little look about let's have a little look at what they say. Here's about the library, and it says the same as the video, obviously, that they work for the MPs and their staff with impartial briefings, evidence-based, and it's totally, I can't go on, but this is the bit that made me laugh. It says, if you have any comments on our briefings, please email papers@parliament.uk. Authors are available to discuss the content of this briefing only with members and their staff. So the public pays for it. It says we own it. It says it is for us, but don't you dare try and talk to the author to ask them any questions. And if you think you're going to go for them because they've got information wrong, well, of course, you're not going to get very far, because there's a very fat disclaimer saying whatever mistake or error or fakeness they put in their briefing for our politicians, don't come running to us, because you're not going to get us on any liability whatsoever. So this is the brain, child. This is the brain of most MPs, David. There's no question of this, because we have so many letters sent to the UK column where people show us a letter from their MP, where the letter simply regurgitates a House of Commons briefing document. Quite pathetic.
Have you any thoughts?
Well, I loved the reference to all of our experts who've had plenty of college and spend a lot of time on these reports, only use trusted sources. Trusted sources comes up again. So that means if anyone in the world asks an awkward question of authority, they instantly become not a trusted source, and therefore become excluded from any research or assembly of research that the House of Commons Library might do. Therefore, all awkward questions are excluded by definition.
You have it in a nutshell. You've got it.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's bring Priti Patel back on screen, the Home Secretary, of course, because she had some very important information for us yesterday. She said that in March 2018, Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia were poisoned with a military-grade nerve agent of a type developed by Russia, commonly known as Novichok. On the 5th of September 2018, the Independent Director of Public Prosecutions announced there was sufficient evidence to bring charges against 2 Russian nationals for conspiracy to murder Sergei Skripal, the attempted murder of Sergei Skripal, Yulia Skripal, and Nick Bailey, causing grievous bodily harm with intent to Yulia Skripal and Nick Bailey, and possession and use of a chemical weapon. The police can now evidence that Alexander Petrov and Ruslan Baryshov are aliases for Alexander Mishkin and Anatoly Chapega, and that both are members of the GRU. The CPS has now authorized charges against a third individual known as Sergei Fedotov. So we have now a third person involved in this grand conspiracy by the Russians. Our government will be relentless in our pursuit of justice for the victims of these attacks and continue to do whatever is necessary to keep our people safe. Now, I'm going to say that we covered this extensively at the time, and have a look at the UK Column News archive on the website if you want to just search for Skripal and you'll find a host of the coverage at the time. But the types of narratives that we saw at the time, the type of story that the British public was expected to swallow during the Skripal story was very similar to what they subsequently were expected to swallow with Novichok. And of course, we've got to remind ourselves what the chief medical officer of the time, Dame Sally Davies, said, because Novichok is a terrible nerve agent, and if you get it on your clothes, it is undoubtedly lethal. So the best way to deal with it was through this advice. And she said, my advice for any individual: wash your clothes and wipe down your personal items, shoes and bags with cleansing or baby wipes before disposing of them in the usual way. And this is exactly the type of advice that we've seen from the chief medical officer in 2021, who's a different person, of course, and all the SAGE advisors over coronavirus, David. It is just, people swallowed that at the time, and they've continued to swallow nonsense from these people ever since, it seems to me.
Well, this is the problem. The same problem we've seen in the House of Commons Library, that you don't have any critical thinking being done. The press, the mainstream press, by and large, are not doing it. And sadly, our people have mostly lost the ability to simply laugh at these explanations. I think 20, 30, 40 years ago, maybe more, that's what they would have received, just derision, because the excuses are not credible, they're not rational. But now it seems to be accepted because it's repeated so often on so much media, on so many news channels. It simply becomes the truth, even though it's deeply irrational and makes no sense at all.
Indeed. Okay, well, look, it's nearly 2:15, so we're going to probably end with this one. This is the Daily Record, David, and the Stephen Sutherland case. Now, can you just give us a brief précis of what this was about before we get into the detail of it?
Well, I've got a timeline coming up, and I'll take you quickly through that. But Stephen Sutherland was a young man. He disappeared one night in Caithness. He was his body was found a few days later on a beach just near his home. There was immediately a lot of suspicion over what had happened, but the police didn't seem interested. The police were actually quite hostile towards people coming forward with evidence and with concerns over what had befallen Stephen. And they concluded that it was suicide, and they went through various explanations of how this happened, none of which was rational or made any sense. And Stephen's family would not accept this and continued to campaign for many, many years to have a reinvestigation. So 2 years ago, Police Scotland announced that they would yield to this demand and they would have a thorough and root and branch reinvestigation of the whole thing, that they would go door to door and they'd leave no stone unturned. And now we have the results of that investigation. So the Daily Record reports family convinced the son was murdered, was told there was no criminality by police. So the police have just said there's nothing to see here. So after a major reinvestigation, detectives and prosecutors confirmed in a meeting with Stephen's family that a spot of blood was found in the living room wall of a violent drug dealer, but insisted no evidence existed to justify charges. This is a violent drug dealer who had beaten Stephen up a short while before this, before his disappearance. Deputy Crown Agent Lindsay Miller led a meeting with the Southern family in Inverness on September 7, 8 years and a day after Stephen was last seen alive. In 2019, the Daily Record revealed blood stain on the wall carried Stefan's DNA, and that injuries to his body suggested he'd been brutally beaten, and that witnesses reported the suspect had burned the carpet and sofa soon after Stefan vanished. So there's lots of evidence that something was happening here. Stefan's family believe the reinvestigation has placed too much emphasis on Facebook posts by Stefan, where he talks about his mental health difficulties. Police Scotland also attended as the family was talked through the document and was told a thorough investigation lasting almost 2 years ruled out criminality. Dad Sandy last night insisted there were still unanswered questions over Stefan's death. He said, "I asked the senior investigating officer Graham Mackey, when did Stefan die? Where did he die? How did he die? Why did he die?" He just looked at me because they still don't know. So those are the level of unanswered questions. Here we see some of Stefan's family around his grave, and the family continued. He was making plans for the future that did not involve killing himself. He had no mental health problems and had never been treated for depression. Sandy said they spent 2 years investigating Stefan's Facebook posts instead of searching for evidence to establish how his blood ended up on the wall of a guy who had beaten him unconscious once before. From pages 6 to 19 of the document, they mention Stefan's Facebook posts and comments 31 times. Assistant Chief Constable Hawkins said Stefan's death was a tragedy for the family and his friends and the close-knit Caithness community. Our sympathies remain with them all. I recognise that the years of campaigning by the Southern family who have rightly sought answers on a number of questions surrounding Stefan's death. The review found that many of these questions and concerns were based on unsubstantiated information being passed to them, which understandably caused significant grief and worry to the Sutherland family and the local community. A spokesperson for the Crown Office said Crown Counsel has instructed that there should be no proceedings in this case. So as far as Police Scotland and the Crown Office are concerned, it's closed. Marcello Mega here has the timeline of events. Marcello Mega is a journalist who's covered this extensively. On the 6th of September 2013, Stefan was last seen in the Shelligo Road in Libster, and his decomposed body was washed up and found in the high water mark at Aucumster on the 17th. A post-mortem concluded that Stefan did not drown and there were injuries to his face and hands that his family believes would be consistent with a beating. Stefan's family learned from the community that he was seen going to the home of a drug dealer who beat him unconscious the previous year. In January 2014, the council house at Shelligo Road was vacated and police carried out a forensic search. Stefan's DNA was confirmed in a blood spot on the wall. In January 2014, a senior colleague of the pathologist who carried out the post-mortem reviews the findings and suggests drowning is a possibility, but cause of death remains head injury. Police continue to maintain their position that there are no suspicious circumstances. 2019, the Daily Record breaks the story about the family's quest for a thorough investigation. And October 2019, following a series of revelations in their articles, the Police Scotland announced a review of the case by its major investigations team. And then today, they've said there's nothing to see here. The John O'Groats Courier, who'd been a local newspaper, but oddly quiet on this major story, also report that the family are shocked by the result. Corey's sister here, obviously, we won't be giving up. We just don't believe there was no criminal activity. We are not the first family in the community to go through it, and I doubt we'll be the last, to be honest. And just to finish off here, back in 2017, we published Stefan Sutherland, The Unanswered Questions, on the UK column. And those questions are still unanswered to this day. I personally believe there was foul play. I do not believe the tale that's been spun to try and make it suicide. And I think there's more than enough evidence to see some action. And personally, my view is that there will be a reason that there's no action, a reason which will be hidden from view.
Okay, thank you for that, David. Tragic case, and we can see across the country, whether it's Scotland or England, Wales, Northern Ireland, cases where there does not seem to be a proper investigation into a crime. And of course, this is very serious. The public should be deeply concerned where the police seem to fail to do their basic job. as a matter of interest, it appears that locally, information that members of the public are trying to give to the local police about missing schoolgirl Jeanette Tate. This was a 13-year-old girl who disappeared back in August 1978. But that information apparently not being received by the police. Well, doors closed is what we're hearing. So perhaps we'll be able to give more on that. But very strange when the police don't seem to want to do their basic job of investigating.
Well, we're out of time.
We're out of time. We'll leave it there on that very serious note. David, thank you very much for joining us. A big thank you to all of our viewers, and particularly people watching in from overseas. We know some of you are in very remote locations, but you're managing to get the wherewithal to tune in for the UK column news broadcasts. And a big thank you to all of you who are continuing to tell us that you are helping to keep you sane. So that's a really big compliment for us. So thank you very much for that.
Stay with us. We'll be here for some extra if you're on the UK column live stream, and otherwise we'll be back 1 p.m. as usual on Friday.
Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.